All right, this is the first video lecture in Unit 2 of Macroeconomics, Measuring Domestic Output and National Income. And today, in this video lecture, I'd like to talk about the most basic macroeconomic measure, which is gross domestic product. And we're going to compare nominal GDP with real GDP, and hopefully we'll do this in one 15-minute segment. Okay, so what is macroeconomics? We know this is the study of the large economy as a whole. It's a study of the big picture. And we use macroeconomic analysis to analyze how things are going, what is the health of the sum of the parts. Using gross domestic product, we can compare our current performance to that of other economies around the globe. And we can compare our own performance to past and performance as well as current performance. The field of macroeconomics is born out of the Great Depression. It's a 20th century invention, and the most influential macroeconomists of today, Hayek and Keynes and some other names that we'll be learning about this semester, really come to be great influencers during this 20th century, especially after the Great Depression, and more so even after the Second World War. Government beforehand didn't necessarily understand how to fix a depressed economy, and so that was exemplified during the Great Depression, or as a cause of the Great Depression, when interest rates were raised substantially just after and during the time of the stock market crash in 1929, which was not exactly the right solution. So I think the federal government has learned a lot through macroeconomics, and hopefully you will be learning a lot through this unit of study. All right, so macro is intended to measure the health of the whole economy and to help guide government policies to fix problems. There are three major economic goals. This goes for all modern day countries and economies, but in particular in the United States. We want to promote economic growth, and that's for the long term. Also limit unemployment, not to eliminate unemployment to 0%, but to help keep unemployment rates at what's called a natural rate of unemployment, which is around 4.5%. And to keep prices stable, which means to limit inflation and hopefully deflation. Inflation being the increase of prices over a period of time, too much money in circulation chasing after too few goods, whereas deflation is actually a decline in price levels over time. And so we'll talk more later on why neither of those are really preferable in an economy. Okay, so the first goal is to promote economic growth, and a country measures economic growth much the same way as a business would. Corporations, for instance, often release quarterly reports about their productivity and profitability, and shareholders may take a look at these reports and determine whether or not their investment is going to be doing well with this corporation much longer. Economies and countries use the measures of economic growth much the same way. We look at profitability and or economic health on a large scale by determining the dollar value of goods and services that are sold in an economy in a given year. All right, and then of course that figure is released quarterly as well. How do we know how well the economy is doing? Well, using positive economics. Economists want to collect statistics, trying to avoid more normative statements. Oh, well, we feel like the economy is doing well. Well, what is our current output? What is the inflation rate? What is unemployment? Those are some of the factors that we'll want to learn about and analyze. So using what's called national income accounting, economists look at statistics on production, income, investments, and savings. And one of the most important measures, of course, of national income accounting is the gross domestic product. So in the United States, it's the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is an agency of the Commerce Department that compiles national income and product account data in the U.S. economy. And so this really benefits economists and policymakers. So GDP specifically is gross domestic product, gross meaning total, domestic meaning produced within a country's borders, and product meaning these are the goods and services that are bought within the product market in a given calendar year. So GDP is a number, and it's a dollar value. So it is written in terms of the final selling price for all goods and services that are sold for the first time. So there's some things that aren't included in GDP, and we'll go over those in just a moment. The final goods meaning specifically that these goods are not just materials or resources. They're not what's called intermediate goods, but that they are one unit that's being sold in the product market. So for instance, you just bought a new Jeep Wrangler. Cool. Well, GDP is going to count the purchase of that Jeep Wrangler, the selling price, which was maybe $28,000. What it does not include is the Bose stereo system that is inside of your vehicle, which may retail for $400 on the market, but those two things, the car and the radio, are not counted separately. So intermediate goods being goods used perhaps in the production process, or goods that could be sold separately but aren't. They're just counted once. We want to avoid double counting is the idea, so that GDP is not inflated. All right, and again, one calendar year, so we can compare economic performance annually and consistently over time. So GDP tells us, just like calculating your own income, how well the U.S. is doing financially, and that's maybe seems like a simplification, and it is, and there are lots of limitations to GDP, but that's the basic idea. It's like taking your temperature to see, as a basic indicator, how healthy you are at any given point in time. So how do you use GDP to compare previous year's performance? Has there been growth? Is an essential question. Using GDP to compare policy changes. In the United States, governments revolve, and primarily a two-party system, and so we're able to compare the performance under one party versus the performance of the economy under another. Now, again, is there causation being compared? Not necessarily, but perhaps we can see some strong correlation between certain policies and economic performance. And of course, we want to be able to compare our own economy to others. Are we better off? And corporations and businesses want to compare economies around the world, especially in today's global economy, where an American firm may produce a component of its product in another country, or it may allow labor in another country to produce a component of its product. And so knowing where to go, where is there rather a stable economy, can really be an important measure or variable in making a decision about how to allocate global production. And there's lots of data in the notes here, and some funny images that we've looked at in class about the United States and GDP and the benefits of being a country that's like a conglomerate of microeconomies, or smaller, large economies, if that makes sense, that are all interconnected. And so the U.S. GDP is a statistic that includes all states, but each state also produces their own GDP data as well, and so that's interesting to look at, and we'll do that more in class in the next week or so. So measuring growth from year to year, and this is an important formula. This is the measure that we look at, the percentage change in GDP from one year to the next. And so we're looking at how to measure a change in GDP. And the example that's given is using more doors GDP, and we want to look at this example and recognize how the net change is divided by the base year and multiplied by 100 to give us a percentage of GDP change. So what's not included in GDP? Intermediate goods, as we said, to avoid multiple counting. Non-production transactions are also excluded. These include any financial transactions, things that are simply on paper and not actually a real good or service. So the exchange of stocks or bonds and even real estate transactions are not included. However, construction would be included. So a new home that was built in 2014 and sold in 2014 would be included in 2014's data. However, if that home were then resold in 2015, that selling price would not be included in GDP. Okay, so used cars or any second-hand items from the thrift store would not be included in GDP. Non-market or illegal activities, underground activities, babysitting, for instance, scandalous babysitters, not included in GDP. And work you do for yourself at home is not included in GDP. So when mom and dad make you mow the lawn in the summer, you're benefiting your family, but you're not benefiting your country's GDP. So, attaboy. Calculating GDP, there are two approaches: the expenditures approach and the income approach. With the expenditures approach, we use a simple formula to add up all the spending on final goods and services produced in that year. And the income approach is one that we'll use some, but probably not as much in class, adding up all the income that resulted from selling all final goods and services produced in a year. So we'll talk about disposable income, personal income, net national income, and things like that that are part of the income approach specifically. But both ways generate the same amount in theory, because every dollar spent is a dollar of income. So two different ways to look at it. And if you just envision the circular flow chart, then it's pretty clear to see how that ties in. All right, so with the expenditures approach, we said there are four components of GDP. The formula for GDP is C plus I plus G plus X sub N, which stands for net exports, or exports minus or less the imports in a given year. So C stands for consumer spending. This is anything that's purchased in the product market, from a $5 Little Caesars pizza to a shirt that you bought at the Gap. I is investments, when businesses put money back into their own businesses, and investments include inventories that are added to a business's inventories in a given year. So it doesn't account for perhaps all current inventories, but only those added in the current year. Any machinery or tools, capital goods that may have been invested in or repaired in that year. G stands for government spending, and this is more about the physical, tangible things the government has purchased in that year, such as bombs or tanks, and or highway construction or repair. Not, however, transfer payments such as welfare, Medicaid, Social Security, etc. Net exports, again, is exports less the imports in a given year. So it's the dollar value of all goods sold minus the dollar value of all goods imported. The value of 3 Ford Focuses minus 2 Hondas, if those 2 Hondas were in fact constructed in Japan. So this gets a little tricky in that let's say an American-owned firm like Apple produces a product outside of the United States and sells that product outside of the United States. Well, some of that profit may come back to Apple, located in the United States. However, that product and its selling price would be added to the GDP of that foreign country that it was sold in. So really, wherever the good or service is bought or sold is where it's added to an economy's or country's GDP measure. So that is GDP. And in the next video, we'll look at how to calculate GDP.